The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and grief, the kind that clings to your skin and makes every breath feel like a confession. Ethan Caldwell stood alone by his father's open grave, his hands trembling as he clutched a single white rose, its petals bruised from his tightening grip. He was 26, but today he felt like a boy again, small and unseen, suffocating under the weight of a secret he'd been told to bury deeper than the coffin before him. The funeral was a mosaic of faces, some familiar, some strangers, all gathered in the small Virginia cemetery to mourn James Caldwell, a man revered as a pillar of the community, a stern but respected lawyer whose legacy loomed larger than the life he'd lived. Ethan's mother, Diane, stood rigid a few feet away, her black veil a shield against the world, her eyes avoiding his. She'd been clear that morning. "Don't make a scene, Ethan. Not today. Keep it private." Her words, sharp and clipped, had sliced through him, a reminder that even in death, his father's shadow demanded conformity. Ethan was to hide who he was, again, just as he had for years under James's roof, where love was conditional and silence was survival. The minister's voice droned on, a steady hum of scripture that blurred into the rustle of leaves overhead. Ethan's gaze drifted to the crowd, his father's colleagues in crisp suits, neighbors with tight-lipped sympathy, and a few distant relatives who hadn't spoken to him since he'd left home at 18. They didn't know him, not really. They didn't know about the nights he'd spent sneaking out to meet Luca, the boy who'd taught him that love could feel like freedom. They didn't know about the letters he'd written to his father, begging for acceptance, only to receive cold silence in return. And they certainly didn't know about the stranger standing at the edge of the crowd, a man Ethan had never seen before, whose piercing gray eyes seemed to see straight through him. The stranger was older, maybe in his late 50s, with a weathered face and a worn leather jacket that stood out against the sea of black. He didn't belong here, not in this town, not in this moment. Yet his presence was magnetic, like a lighthouse in a storm. Ethan caught his gaze for a fleeting second, and something in those eyes, compassion, defiance, maybe both, made Ethan's heart lurch. He looked away, focusing on the rose in his hand, its thorns pricking his palm. The service dragged on, each eulogy painting James as a saint, a man of principle, a father who'd done his best. Ethan's stomach twisted. His father's best had been a closed door, a raised voice, a demand to fix what wasn't broken. When Ethan came out at 16, James hadn't shouted. He'd gone quiet, and that silence was worse. It was a void that swallowed Ethan's courage, leaving him to navigate a world where his truth was a liability. Luca had been his lifeline, a vibrant artist with a laugh that could chase away shadows, but even Luca couldn't erase the ache of a father's rejection. As the minister called for a moment of silence, Ethan's mind flashed to the last time he'd seen his father, 6 months ago at a tense family dinner. James had barely looked at him, his disapproval a palpable weight. Ethan had wanted to scream, to demand why love was a sin in his father's eyes, but he'd stayed silent, as always. Now, standing by the grave, he regretted it. He regretted every unspoken word, every chance he didn't take to fight for himself. The crowd began to disperse, mourners drifting toward their cars, their whispers blending with the wind. Ethan stayed rooted, unable to move, the rose still clutched in his hand. His mother approached, her face a mask of composed grief. "Ethan, it's time to go," she said, her voice low but firm. "People are watching. Let them watch," he muttered, surprising himself. The words felt like a spark, small but dangerous. Diane's lips tightened. "This isn't the place. You know what your father would have wanted." Ethan's jaw clenched. What he wanted was for me to disappear. Her eyes widened, but before she could respond, a voice cut through the air, deep and steady, like a stone dropped into still water. "Excuse me, may I say something?" All heads turned. It was the stranger, stepping forward from the crowd's edge, his hands clasped in front of him. The murmurs stopped, replaced by a tense curiosity. Ethan's pulse quickened. Who was this man? And why did he look like he carried the weight of a truth no one else dared to touch? The stranger cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping the crowd before settling on Ethan. "My name is Thomas Reed. I knew James Caldwell, not as a lawyer or a neighbor, but as a friend. A complicated one. His voice was calm, but carried an edge, like he was choosing each word with care. I'm here to honor him, but I'm also here to honor someone else. Someone who deserves to be seen. Ethan's breath caught. The crowd shifted, uneasy, but Thomas didn't falter. He took a step closer to the grave, his eyes never leaving Ethan's. James wasn't perfect. He loved fiercely, but he didn't always know how to show it. And Ethan, Thomas's voice softened, but it didn't waver. Ethan, he loved you, even if he didn't know how to say it. But you don't have to hide who you are to prove that love. The words hit Ethan like a tidal wave, washing away the years of silence, the shame, the fear. He felt exposed, raw, but also, strangely, free. The crowd was silent, some faces shocked, others curious, a few even nodding. Diane's hand flew to her mouth, but she didn't speak. Ethan's eyes burned with unshed tears, and he looked at Thomas, searching for answers. Who was this man, and how did he know? Thomas continued, his voice steady but thick with emotion. I met James years ago, when we were both young and figuring out who we were. He was my friend, my confidant, and for a time, something more. A gasp rippled through the crowd, but Thomas didn't flinch. We were both scared back then, hiding who we were because the world told us to. I chose to live my truth. James didn't. But he never forgot you, Ethan. He kept every letter you sent him. He read them over and over, even if he couldn't bring himself to respond. Ethan's knees buckled, and he gripped the edge of a nearby headstone to steady himself. His father had kept his letters? The ones he'd poured his heart into, the ones he thought had been thrown away? The revelation was too much, too heavy, and yet it felt like a lifeline. Thomas stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, meant only for Ethan. You don't have to hide anymore. Not for him, not for anyone. You are enough. The rose slipped from Ethan's hand, landing softly on the earth. He didn't know if he wanted to scream or sob or run, but he knew one thing. This stranger had just cracked open the cage he'd been locked in for years. And as the crowd watched, some with judgment, some with awe, Ethan felt the first stirrings of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The cemetery was quieter now, the mourners' footsteps fading into the crunch of gravel as they retreated to their cars. Ethan stood frozen, Thomas's words echoing in his mind like a melody he couldn't unhear. The stranger, Thomas Reed, had just unveiled a piece of his father's life that Ethan had never known, a hidden chapter that made the ground beneath him feel unsteady, like it might swallow him whole. Ethan's mother lingered nearby, her face pale beneath her veil. She hadn't spoken since Thomas's speech, but her silence was louder than any words. Ethan could feel her gaze, heavy with unspoken questions, but he couldn't meet her eyes. Not yet. Instead, he turned to Thomas, who was now kneeling to place a small bouquet of wildflowers on James's grave. The gesture was simple, intimate, and it stirred something deep in Ethan, a mix of gratitude and confusion. Thank you, Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. But who are you? Really? Thomas stood, brushing dirt from his hands, his expression soft but guarded. I told you, I was a friend of your father's. We met in college, back when the world felt like a minefield for people like us. He paused, glancing at the grave. James was complicated. He wanted to be the man his family expected, but he carried a lot of regrets. You were one of them. Ethan's throat tightened. He never told me. About you, about any of it. Thomas nodded, his eyes distant. He didn't tell anyone. That was his way. But he talked about you, Ethan. Always with pride, even if it was tangled up in his own fears. The words were a lifeline, but they also stung. Ethan wanted to believe them, to hold on to the idea that his father had cared, but the years of silence were hard to erase. He glanced at the crowd, now sparse, and noticed a few lingering faces, his father's old law partner, a neighbor, a cousin, all watching him with a mix of curiosity and judgment. He felt exposed, like a wound laid bare, but Thomas's presence grounded him. Come with me, Thomas said, gesturing toward a bench under a nearby oak. Let's talk. Away from all this. Ethan hesitated, glancing at his mother. Diane was speaking to the minister now, her posture stiff, her hands clasped tightly. He knew she'd want him to stay, to play the role of the grieving son, but he was done performing. He nodded at Thomas and followed him to the bench, the cool autumn air biting at his skin. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of a car engine. Ethan clutched his hands together, trying to steady himself. "What was he like?" he finally asked. "When you knew him, I mean. Before everything." Thomas leaned back, his gaze fixed on the horizon. James was fierce, brilliant, stubborn, and so damn scared of himself. "We met at UVA, both of us studying law, both of us hiding who we were. I was bolder back then, maybe reckless. I'd sneak out to underground bars, places where people like us could breathe for a night. James came with me once, and I saw him light up, really light up, for the first time. But he pulled back, said it was too risky, that his family would never understand." Ethan's chest ached. He could picture it. His father, young and torn, caught between who he was and who he thought he had to be. It was a mirror of Ethan's own life, the years spent tiptoeing around his truth to keep the peace. "Did you love him?" Ethan asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Thomas's lips curved into a sad smile. "I did, for a while. But love wasn't enough for him, not then. He chose the path he thought was safer. Married your mom, built a life. I moved to San Francisco, found my own way. We lost touch, but he reached out a few years ago. Said he'd been following my work, that he was proud of me. And he talked about you." Ethan's eyes stung. "He never told me any of this." "He was ashamed," Thomas said softly. "Not of you, of himself. He thought he was protecting you by keeping you at arm's length, but he was wrong. I told him that when we last spoke, a few months ago. He was sick by then, but he didn't want you to know. Said he didn't want to burden you." The revelation hit Ethan like a punch. His father had been sick, dying, and hadn't told him? The anger flared, hot and sharp, but beneath it was a deeper pain, a longing for a connection that had slipped through his fingers. "Why didn't he just talk to me?" Ethan's voice cracked. "I would have listened." Thomas reached out, resting a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Fear makes us do stupid things. But you're here now, and you get to decide what comes next." Ethan looked down at his hands, still trembling, and realized he didn't know what next looked like. He'd spent so long hiding, trying to be the son his father wanted, that he'd forgotten how to be himself. But Thomas's words, his presence, felt like permission to try. As they sat there, a young woman approached, her vibrant red scarf a stark contrast to the muted tones of the cemetery. She was in her early 20s, with warm brown skin and a cautious smile. "Ethan," she said, her voice tentative. "I'm Maya. I knew your dad through his pro bono work. He helped my family when we were in a bad spot." Ethan blinked, surprised. His father had never mentioned pro bono work. "He did." Maya nodded, clutching a small notebook. "Yeah, he was tough, but kind. He talked about you sometimes. Said you were an artist, like your boyfriend." Ethan's heart skipped. "He told you about Luca?" She smiled, a little shy. "Yeah, he was proud of you, even if he didn't say it right. I thought you should know." The words were another crack in the wall Ethan had built around himself. He glanced at Thomas, who gave him an encouraging nod, and then back at Maya. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick. "That means a lot." Maya hesitated, then handed him the notebook. "He gave me this to give to you. Said it was important." Ethan took it, his fingers brushing the worn leather cover. It was heavy, not just with paper, but with the weight of what it might contain. He didn't open it, not yet. He wasn't ready, but he held it close, a tangible piece of his father he could carry with him. As Maya walked away, Thomas stood. "You've got people who see you, Ethan. Don't forget that." He glanced at the crowd, now almost gone, and added, "And you've got a choice to make. Stay here, keep hiding, or step into the light." Ethan looked at the notebook, then at the grave, and finally at the faint rainbow on the horizon. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in years, he felt like he could ask the questions. Ethan sat on the bench, the leather notebook heavy in his lap, its edges worn from years of handling. The cemetery was nearly empty now, the last mourners vanishing into the dusk, leaving only the whisper of leaves and the distant call of a crow. He traced the notebook's cover, his fingers hesitating over the clasp, afraid of what he might find inside, afraid it might confirm his father's love, or worse, his indifference. Thomas had left him alone, saying he needed space, but his words still lingered. You've got a choice to make. Ethan felt the weight of that choice, a crossroads between the safety of silence and the risk of being seen. He glanced at his mother, now standing by the car, her posture rigid, waiting for him to follow. But he wasn't ready to leave, not yet. He opened the notebook, his heart pounding. The first page was filled with his father's precise handwriting, a mix of notes and dates, some crossed out, others underlined. It wasn't a diary, not exactly, but a record. Cases, thoughts, fragments of a life. Ethan flipped through, searching for something personal, something meant for him. Halfway through, he found it. A letter, tucked between pages, addressed to him in his father's unmistakable scrawl. Ethan, it began, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I've left too much unsaid. I'm sorry for that. I was never good at saying what mattered. The words blurred as Ethan's eyes filled with tears. He forced himself to keep reading, each sentence a revelation, a confession. James wrote about his own struggles, his fear of disappointing his family, his regret for pushing Ethan away. I saw your art at that gallery in Richmond, one line read. You have a gift, son. I should have told you that. Ethan's breath hitched. His father had seen his work? He remembered that exhibition. 2 years ago, a small show Luca had convinced him to enter. He'd thought no one from his family cared. The letter continued, describing James's pride in Ethan's courage, his pain at their distance, and his hope that Ethan would forgive him. I didn't know how to love you the way you deserved, James wrote, but I always did. The words were a balm and a wound, healing and hurting all at once. Ethan closed the notebook, clutching it to his chest, and let the tears come. He cried for the years lost, for the conversations they'd never had, for the man who'd loved him in silence. But he also cried for himself, for the boy who'd hidden so long he'd forgotten how to stand tall. A hand touched his shoulder, gentle but firm. It was Luca, his dark curls catching the fading light, his warm brown eyes filled with concern. Ethan, he said softly, I got your text. I came as soon as I could. Ethan hadn't realized he'd texted Luca, a reflex born of desperation after Thomas's speech. He stood, falling into Luca's arms, the notebook pressed between them. Luca held him tight, his familiar scent of paint and cedar grounding Ethan in a way nothing else could. I'm here, Luca murmured. Whatever you need, I'm here. They sat together on the bench, Ethan recounting Thomas's words, the letter, the weight of it all. Luca listened, his hand never leaving Ethan's, his presence a quiet strength. Your dad was wrong to make you hide, Luca said when Ethan finished. But he was human. And he loved you, even if he messed it up. Ethan nodded, wiping his eyes. I don't know how to do this. Be myself, out here, where everyone's watching. Luca squeezed his hand. You don't have to do it alone. And you don't have to do it all at once. As they spoke, Ethan's mother approached, her steps hesitant. She stopped a few feet away, her veil now lifted, revealing a face etched with grief and something else, uncertainty. Ethan, she said, her voice softer than before. Can we talk? Luca gave Ethan an encouraging nod, standing to give them space. Ethan braced himself, expecting another lecture, but Diane's eyes were different now, softer, searching. I heard what Thomas said, she began. And I saw the notebook. I didn't know about James, about his past. Not all of it. Ethan's throat tightened. Did you read the letter? She shook her head. It wasn't mine to read. But I know he loved you. He was just scared. We both were. Her voice broke, and for the first time, Ethan saw his mother not as a wall, but as a person, flawed and struggling. I don't want to lose you too, she said. I don't know how to do this, but I want to try. The words were tentative, a fragile bridge between them. Ethan didn't know if he could trust it. Not yet, but he wanted to. Okay, he said, his voice barely audible. Let's try. Diane nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. She reached out, hesitating, then pulled Ethan into a hug. It was awkward, unfamiliar, but it was a start. Luca watched from a distance, a small smile on his face, and Ethan felt a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, he could build something new from the ashes of his father's silence. As night fell, the cemetery grew colder, the rainbow on the horizon now gone. Ethan, Luca, and Diane walked back to the car together, the notebook still in Ethan's hand. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time, he felt like he could face it, not as the son his father wanted, but as the man he was. The drive back to Ethan's childhood home was quiet, the hum of the car's engine a stark contrast to the storm of emotions swirling inside him. Lucas sat beside him, his hand resting on Ethan's knee, a silent anchor. Diane drove, her eyes fixed on the road, the notebook now tucked safely in Ethan's bag. The small Virginia town passed by in a blur, red brick houses, fading storefronts, the diner where Ethan used to sneak milkshakes with Luca after school. It all felt familiar yet foreign, like a memory he'd outgrown. At the house, Diane busied herself in the kitchen, preparing coffee no one asked for, her movements a nervous attempt to fill the silence. Ethan and Luca sat in the living room, surrounded by relics of his father's life. Law books stacked on shelves, a worn armchair by the window, a photo of Ethan as a child, grinning gap-toothed on a fishing trip. The photo stung. Those days felt like a lifetime ago, before the silence, before the secrets. Luca leaned closer, his voice low. "You okay?" Ethan shook his head, then nodded, unsure. "I don't know what to feel. Angry, sad, relieved. It's all mixed up." Luca squeezed his hand. "You don't have to sort it out tonight. Just let it be." Diane returned with a tray of coffee, her hands trembling slightly as she set it down. She sat across from them, her posture stiff, and cleared her throat. "Ethan, I owe you an apology. For today, for before. I thought I was protecting you, keeping things orderly. But I was wrong." Ethan looked at her, searching her face for sincerity. He wanted to believe her, but years of distance made trust feel like a leap. "Why didn't you ever ask?" he said, his voice raw. "About me, about who I am. You just let Dad decide what was okay." Diane's eyes dropped to her hands. "I was afraid. Of losing him. Of losing you. I thought if I kept the peace, we'd stay a family. But I see now how much that cost you." The admission was a crack in the wall between them, small but real. Ethan glanced at Luca, who gave him a subtle nod, urging him to keep going. "I needed you to see me," Ethan said. "Not just the parts Dad approved of. All of me." Diane's lips trembled. "I want to, Ethan. I do. Can you help me understand?" It was a question, not a demand, and it caught Ethan off guard. He took a deep breath, the weight of the notebook in his bag grounding him. "Okay," he said, "but it's not just about me. It's about Luca, too. He's part of my life." Diane's gaze shifted to Luca, who met her eyes with quiet confidence. "I love your son," Luca said simply. "And I'll be here, whatever you decide." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of Luca's words settling over them. Diane nodded slowly, her expression softening. "Thank you, Luca, for being there for him. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start." Ethan felt a knot in his chest loosen, just a little. They talked for hours, haltingly at first, then more openly, about Ethan's art, Luca's murals, the life they'd built in Richmond. Diane listened, asking questions, stumbling over terms but trying. It was messy, imperfect, but it was real. The next morning, Ethan woke to the smell of pancakes, a childhood memory that felt out of place in the heavy air of grief. Luca was already up, sketching at the kitchen table, his pencil dancing across a napkin. Diane was at the stove, flipping pancakes with a focus that felt like an apology. Ethan joined them, the notebook still close, a reminder of the work still ahead. After breakfast, Ethan and Luca decided to visit the local community center, where Maya had mentioned a memorial event for James's pro bono clients. It was a chance to see another side of his father, one Ethan had never known. The center was a modest building, its walls covered in colorful murals, Luca's kind of place. Inside, a small group had gathered, a mix of ages and backgrounds, all connected by James's quiet acts of kindness. Maya greeted them, her red scarf bright against the gray morning. "I'm glad you came," she said, leading them to a table covered with photos and letters. "Your dad helped a lot of us, immigrants, single moms, kids like me who needed a lawyer but couldn't pay. He never made a big deal about it." Ethan scanned the table, his eyes landing on a photo of his father shaking hands with a young family, their smiles wide and grateful. It was a side of James he'd never seen, a man who'd done good quietly, even if he couldn't extend that grace to his own son. The contrast hurt, but it also gave Ethan a strange sense of pride. A woman approached, older, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "You must be Ethan," she said. "I'm Clara, one of your dad's clients. He talked about you all the time. Said you were going to change the world with your art." Ethan's throat tightened. "He said that?" Clara nodded. "He kept a drawing you made in his office. A little house with a rainbow over it. Said it reminded him of you." The memory hit Ethan hard. A sketch he'd done at 10, carefree and full of color. He hadn't known his father had kept it, let alone cherished it. He thanked Clara, his voice thick, and turned to Luca, who was watching him with quiet pride. As they left the center, Ethan felt the notebook in his bag, its weight a reminder of his father's complexity, flawed, human, and capable of love, even if it came too late. He took Luca's hand, the simple act feeling bolder now, less like a secret. The town around them was waking up, its streets familiar but no longer suffocating. Ethan didn't have all the answers, but he had a path, and for now, that was enough. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the town square as Ethan and Luca walked hand in hand, the notebook tucked safely in Ethan's bag. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke, a reminder of autumn's fleeting beauty. Ethan felt lighter, not because the grief was gone, but because he was starting to see his father as a man, not a myth, flawed, contradictory, but real. They stopped at the diner, its neon sign flickering in the fading light. Inside, the hum of conversation and the clink of dishes felt like a slice of normalcy. Lucas slid into a booth, his sketchbook already open, his fingers itching to capture the world. Ethan watched him, marveling at how Luca could find beauty in the mundane, a waitress's tired smile, the curve of a coffee mug. It was one of the things Ethan loved most about him, his ability to see light where others saw shadows. "You're staring," Luca teased, not looking up from his sketch. "Can't help it," Ethan said, a small smile breaking through. "You're distracting." Luca grinned, his eyes warm. "Good. You need a distraction." They ordered milkshakes, a nod to their high school days when they'd sneak here after curfew, sharing stories and dreams under the fluorescent lights. Back then, Ethan had been terrified of being caught, of someone seeing them together and reporting back to his father. Now, sitting openly with Luca, he felt a quiet defiance, a refusal to hide anymore. The conversation turned to the notebook, to the letter Ethan hadn't yet shared with Luca. "You don't have to read it to me," Lucas said, his voice gentle. "But when you're ready, I'm here." Ethan nodded, his fingers tracing the edge of his glass. "It's just a lot. He wrote things I never thought he'd say. Like he was proud of me. Like he regretted everything." Luca reached across the table, his hand covering Ethan's. He was trying, in his own way. "It doesn't erase the hurt, but it's something." Ethan squeezed Luca's hand, grateful for his steadiness. "I want to show you something," he said, pulling the notebook from his bag. He opened it to a page he'd found that morning, tucked after the letter, a list of names and dates, some with small notes. One entry caught his eye. "Ethan's Gallery Show, Richmond, June 2023. Buy his painting." Luca's eyes widened. "He wanted to buy your work?" Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "I didn't even know he was there. I thought he didn't care." Luca leaned back, his expression soft but serious. "He cared, Ethan. He just didn't know how to show it. But you're showing the world who you are every time you paint. That's your power." The words settled over Ethan, warm and grounding. He thought of his art, the canvases filled with bold colors and raw emotion, the ones Luca had always championed. Maybe that was his way forward, not hiding, not apologizing, but creating unapologetically. Their milkshakes arrived, and they fell into an easy rhythm, talking about lighter things, Luca's latest mural project, a trip they'd planned to New York, the stray cat that kept sneaking into their apartment. But the notebook stayed on the table, a quiet presence, a bridge to a past Ethan was still unraveling. As they left the diner, Ethan noticed a group of teenagers across the street, laughing and shoving each other playfully. One of them, a boy with bright blue hair, caught his eye and waved. Ethan waved back, a small gesture that felt monumental. He wasn't invisible here, not anymore. They walked to the park, where a small vigil had been set up for James's pro bono clients. Maya was there, organizing candles and flowers, her energy infectious. She spotted Ethan and Luca and rushed over, her smile wide. "You made it. We're just sharing stories about your dad. Want to join?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. The group was small but diverse. Families, individuals, all touched by James's quiet generosity. One by one, they shared memories. A single mother whose home was saved from foreclosure, a young man who'd escaped an abusive situation with James's legal help, a family of immigrants who'd found stability because of him. Ethan listened, each story adding a new layer to the man he thought he'd known. When it was his turn, Ethan stood, his heart pounding. "I didn't know this side of my dad," he admitted, his voice steady despite the nerves. "I spent a lot of years thinking he didn't see me, didn't accept me. But today, I'm learning he was more than I realized. And I'm trying to figure out how to carry that with me." The group nodded, some offering soft smiles, others clapping gently. Lucas squeezed his hand, his pride palpable. Maya handed Ethan a candle, its flame flickering in the evening breeze. "For your dad," she said. "And for you." Ethan lit the candle, its light warm against his skin. He thought of Thomas, of the letter, of the rainbow on the horizon. He thought of Luca, steady and unwavering, and of his mother, trying to bridge the gap. Most of all, he thought of himself, not the boy who'd hidden, but the man he was becoming, one brave step at a time. As the vigil ended, Ethan and Luca walked back to the car, the notebook still in his bag, its weight no longer a burden but a promise. The stars were out now, bright against the velvet sky, and Ethan felt something shift inside him, a sense of possibility, a chance to live his truth without fear. The next morning, Ethan woke to the soft patter of rain against the window, the world outside blurred and gray. Luca was still asleep, his arm draped over Ethan's waist, his breathing steady and calm. Ethan lay there, listening to the rain, the notebook on the nightstand a quiet reminder of the journey he was on. Today, he and Luca would return to Richmond, to their apartment, their life. But Ethan knew he was carrying something new back with him, something heavier and lighter all at once. Diane was in the kitchen when Ethan came downstairs, a mug of tea in her hands. She looked up, her face softer than he'd seen in years. "You're leaving soon?" she asked, her voice tentative. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, Luca's got a mural deadline, and I need to get back to painting." She smiled, small but genuine. "I'd like to see your work sometime, if that's okay." The offer caught Ethan off guard, but it warmed him. "I'd like that," he said. "Maybe you could come to Richmond. We could have dinner." Diane's eyes brightened. "I'd like that, too." They stood in the quiet, the rain a soft backdrop, and Ethan felt the fragile bridge between them grow a little stronger. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough for now. He hugged her, brief but real, and promised to call. As Ethan and Luca packed the car, Thomas appeared at the end of the driveway, his leather jacket damp from the rain. He carried a small box, its edges worn and taped. "I was hoping to catch you before you left," he said, handing the box to Ethan. "Your dad asked me to keep this for you. Said it was important." Ethan took the box, his curiosity piqued. "What is it?" Thomas shrugged, a faint smile on his lips. "Open it when you're ready." And Ethan, "Keep being you." It's what he would have wanted, in the end. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "Thank you, Thomas. For everything." Thomas waved it off, but his eyes were warm. "Take care of each other," he said, glancing at Luca, who smiled back. As they drove away, the town fading in the rearview mirror, Ethan felt a mix of relief and longing. He held the box in his lap, its weight a mystery he wasn't ready to unravel. Luca reached over, his hand resting on Ethan's. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft. "Yeah," Ethan said, and for the first time he meant it. "I think I will be." Back in Richmond, their apartment felt like a sanctuary, canvases stacked against the walls, Luca's sketches scattered on the table, the stray cat curled up on the couch. Ethan set the box on the kitchen counter, still unopened, and turned to his easel. He hadn't painted since his father's death, but now, something stirred inside him, a need to create. He chose a large canvas, its blank surface both daunting and inviting. He mixed colors, Deep blues, vibrant reds, a streak of gold. And let his brush move. No plan, just feeling. The strokes were bold, raw, a reflection of the grief, love, and hope tangled in his heart. Luca watched from the couch, his own sketchbook forgotten, his eyes filled with pride. Hours later, the canvas was alive, a swirl of colors, a figure standing under a rainbow, its edges blurred but defiant. It was Ethan, or maybe his father, or maybe both, a testament to survival, to truth. He stepped back, his hands stained with paint, and felt a weight lift. That night, Ethan finally opened the box. Inside was a collection of mementos, a photo of him and his father fishing, his childhood drawing of the house with the rainbow, a stack of his old report cards, and a letter, this one shorter, written in James's hand. Ethan, it read, I kept these to remind myself of you. I hope you keep creating, keep loving, keep being you. I'm sorry I didn't say it sooner. Dad. Ethan's eyes burned, but he smiled through the tears. He showed the letter to Luca, who pulled him close, their foreheads touching. He saw you, Luca whispered. And now the world will, too. The next day, Ethan called Maya, thanking her for the vigil and asking about the community center. She mentioned a youth art program, one that needed volunteers. Ethan offered to teach, to share his love of painting with kids who, like him, might feel unseen. Maya was thrilled, and Ethan felt a spark of purpose, a way to honor his father's quiet good while living his own truth. As the weeks passed, Ethan and Lucas settled back into their rhythm, but something had shifted. Ethan painted more boldly, his work gaining attention at local galleries. Diane visited, hesitant at first, but she stayed for hours, listening to Ethan talk about his art, meeting Lucas' friends, seeing the life her son had built. It wasn't easy, but it was progress. One evening, Ethan stood in front of his latest painting, the one with the rainbow. Luca wrapped an arm around him, his voice soft. You're not hiding anymore. Ethan leaned into him, the warmth of Luca's embrace a reminder of everything he'd fought for. No, he said. I'm not. Months later, Ethan stood in the Richmond Community Center, the air thick with the smell of paint and laughter. The youth art program had grown, its walls now covered with vibrant murals created by kids who reminded Ethan of himself. Searching, bold, afraid, but eager to be seen. He moved between easels, offering gentle encouragement, his own canvas tucked in the corner, a work in progress that felt like a love letter to his past and his future. Luca was there, too, teaching a group how to blend colors, his laughter echoing across the room. Ethan caught his eye, and Luca winked, a silent reminder of the life they'd built together. Diane had visited the center the week before, bringing supplies and staying to watch the kids paint, her smile hesitant but growing. Their relationship was still a work in progress, but each visit, each conversation, was a step towards something stronger. The notebook and the box from Thomas were now on a shelf in their apartment, no longer a mystery, but a touchstone. Ethan had read the letter again and again, each time finding new meaning in his father's words. James had been flawed, trapped by his own fears, but he'd loved Ethan in his imperfect way. That knowledge didn't erase the pain, but it gave Ethan permission to forgive, not just his father, but himself. One afternoon, as the kids packed up, Maya approached, her red scarf as bright as ever. Ethan, we're planning a gallery show for the kids' work. I was hoping you'd display something, too. Maybe that rainbow painting. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, I'd like that. The gallery show was a month later, a celebration of color and courage. Ethan's painting hung in the center, its figure under the rainbow a beacon of resilience. The room was filled with familiar faces, Maya, Diane, Thomas, who'd driven down from D.C., and Luca, who hadn't left Ethan's side. The kids' artwork surrounded his, each piece a story of its own, a reminder that art could heal, could connect, could make the invisible seen. As the crowd mingled, Ethan stepped outside, needing a moment to breathe. The night was clear, the stars bright above the city. He thought of his father, of Thomas's words at the funeral, of the letter that had changed everything. He thought of Luca, his anchor, and of the kids who looked to him for guidance. Most of all, He thought of himself, not the boy who'd hidden, but the man who'd chosen to stand in the light. Luca joined him, slipping an arm around his waist. "Proud of you," he said, his voice warm. Ethan smiled, leaning into him. "I'm proud of us." They stood there, the city alive around them, and Ethan felt a sense of peace he hadn't known was possible. His father's funeral had been a turning point, a moment when a stranger's truth had cracked open his world. But it was Ethan who'd chosen to step through, to live boldly, to love fiercely, to create without fear. Inside, the gallery glowed, the rainbow painting a testament to a journey that was far from over. Ethan took Luca's hand, and they walked back in, ready to face whatever came next, together.